Chapter 4, Mopple squeezes through a gap. Got Brownie, Daffy, and Willow over there. Hi, Willow. Yeah? These are your friends? Yeah. There was no wind the next day, and the gulls were not calling. Thick gray mist crawled back and forth over the meadow. No one could see more than 2 sheep's lengths ahead. For a long time they stayed in the hay barn, where it was warm and comfortable. Now that Tess and George were driving them out into the early morning light anymore, they were choosier. "It's damp," said Maudie. "It's cold," said Sarah. "It's too much to expect of us," said Sir Richfield. That settled the matter. The old ram hated mist. Richfield couldn't use his good eye at all in mist. He realized that he wasn't hearing very well these days, and he very soon forgot which way he had come. But there was another reason for the general hesitation too. The mist seemed to them sinister today, as if strange shadows were moving above its white breath. So they stayed in the hay barn all morning. They got bored, they felt guilty, and finally they were hungry. But they remembered how George and Tess had annoyed them all day, on days like this, and stayed put. A front line of white through thoughtful sheep's face stared short-sightedly into the swats of mist, while Mopple stared, forcing his way into the open air through a gap in the back wall of the barn. The wooden splinters of the rotten planks caught in his fleece and stretched his tender skin. When he had squeezed himself about halfway, he began to wonder whether his idea about the gap had really been a good one. "If the head will fit through, so will the rest of the body," George always used to say. Only now did it strike Mopple that he had been talking about the rats in the shepherd's caravan, feasting on the contents of the rusty cans. Mopple had never seen a rat at close quarters. He wasn't so sure whether they really did look like small sheep. Mopple's mother had told him to want so when he was still a plump, suckling lamb. She said that they were very small and very woolly sheep who ran through the stables and barns in flocks, taking dreams to the big sheep. As a grown ram, he had wondered why other sheep kicked out at those little rat sheeps. He concluded that they were probably sheep having bad dreams. Mopple couldn't complain of his own dreams. There wasn't much variety in them, but they were very peaceful. "Oh, hello, Willow." Mopple stopped to think about what most sheep looked like. Zara, for instance, elegant nose and black face, graceful curved horns. Zara was the only sheep with horns in George's flock, and they suited her extremely well. Large, fleecy body with 4 long, straight legs and delicate feet. The head might be a sheep's most attractive feature, but it wasn't the widest part of its body. Mopple twisted and turned uncomfortably, determined not to panic, at least not straight away. Was it right to go out through a gap in secret behind the backs of the other sheep? He had his reasons, but were they good reasons? For one thing, he felt hungrier sooner and more often than the others. Not a bad reason. Mopple stretched his neck, got a tuft of grass between his teeth, and calmed down a bit. The other reason was more complicated. The other reason was Sir Richfield, or Mopple's own memory, or Miss Maple, or rather all 3 of them together. A clue. There had been a great many clues in George's detective story, but George had thrown the book away. However, Miss Maple would know what to do with a clue, and Richfield would probably try to prevent Mopple from telling Maple. So Mopple had to get through his gap to tell Miss Maple in secret. She wasn't in the hay barn, so she must be outside somewhere, or maybe not. Where are you going? No, don't do that. Before Mopple started, it all had seemed very simple, but not a sharp splinter of wood was sticking into his side, and he was terrified of puncturing himself and leaking out like Sir Richfield. The sheep all agreed that somewhere in Richfield there must be a hole through which his memories leaked down and trickled away, but they ventured to say so only when he wasn't within hearing distance. These days it wasn't difficult to be out of hearing distance for Sir Richfield. What's the matter? The other ducks are looking for you. Mopple tried to make himself thinner. The sharp stabbing feeling went away. He took a deep breath, and the tip of the splinter stuck into the side anyway. Panic was very close now. He felt it breathing down his neck like a beast of prey. He was going to leak worse than Sir Richfield. He forgot everything, even why he was in the gap. And then and then he'd be stuck here forever and die of starvation. Starvation him, Mopple the whale. Mopple made himself so thin that he saw stars in front of his eyes and kicked out frantically with his back legs. Othello had spent half the night out in the in the meadow, dripping wet and in a state of feverish excitement. Would he come back? From the moment when Othello saw Sir Richfield, he had secretly hoped so. He had feared it too. Now it had happened. The memory of a scent still lingered in Othello's nose. Ideals circled around his horns like swirling mist. Joy, anger, fury, 1,000 questions with a tingling sense of embarrassment. But Othello had learned to drive the swirling thoughts in his head away. Through the damp mist, he scented the air in the direction of the hay barn, nervous sweat and a sour smell of bewilderment. The flock was in the grip of disquiet, and rightfully so. Even Othello felt that there was something eerie about the mist today. What's the matter, Daffy? Our sheep Willow has left. Richfield still wasn't letting his sheep out of the dry barn. All the better, but Othello wondered what the lead ram hoped to gain by it. Did Richfield know who had come to their meadow last night? Was he trying to conceal the fact from the other sheep? If so, why? The black ram briefly wondered which way to go. The last likely way, of course. He trotted towards the cliffs. Last night's rain and the misty air had washed away all the scent. Othello put his head on one side and used his eyes to look for tracks, the way a human would. He felt slightly ashamed of that. Almost deaf, almost no sense of smell, he heard the familiar and always slightly mocking voice say inside his head, a voice from memory, accompanied by the rushing of black crow's wings. If you want to know what the two legs know, you have to stop and think what they don't know. All that matters to them is what they can see with their eyes. They don't know more than we do. They know less. That's why it's so difficult to understand them. But Othello shook his head to drive the voice away. Good advice, no doubt about it, but the voice often said confusing things, and now he had to concentrate. In one place, the ground was still just soggy, but positively chunked up. But Miss Maple probably. You would never have left a mess like that behind. Othello was looking for something else. A little further off, he saw a stumped pine tree, the only pine growing anywhere far and wide. Friendly evergreens, keepers of secrets, wise roots. The pine tree attracted Othello. He circled around the small tree until it seemed to lean over in shame before his eyes. Nothing unusual except for the hole, of course. But Othello didn't think much of the stories about the hole. The hole was right beside the root of the pine and went down through the rock of an angel. Day and night, the sound of the sea came through it, mocking laughter from the depths. It was said that at full moon, sea creatures came up through the hole to run their slimy fingers around the hay barn. But Othello knew that the shimmering lines they saw on the wooden walls of the barn when morning came were really slimy trails left by slugs. The other sheep knew it too. In their hearts, they just loved stories. On some days, they could see 3 or 4 particularly bold young sheep assembled under the pine tree, listening to the sound of the hole and giving themselves an enjoyable fright. Now Othello looked down there too. Steep, certainly, but not too steep for a human who could use his hands, and not too steep for a brave sheep. Otello hesitated. Something that tastes bad the first time you chew it won't taste any better the second time, mocked the voice. Waiting feeds your fear, and then added impatiently as the rim still didn't move, but Otello wasn't listening to the voice. He was staring spellbound at something. Dark and shiny at his feet, a shimmering feather, black and still at night. Otello snorted. He turned his head in the direction of the hay barn once more and then disappeared down the hole. Let's see. Mopple was out in the open air, breathing heavily and trembling. His sides felt sore, and there was a sharp stabbing pain in one side. To calm himself down, he repeated the most difficult phrase he had ever learned. Operation Prometheus? Difficult. George sometimes used it to say, and no sheep ever understood him. Mopple was one of the few sheep who could remember things. He didn't even understand. After saying it, he felt braver. Mopple turned his head to look, but without pride, at the narrow gap through which he and Mopple the whale had just squeezed his way. But the wooden wall of the hay barn had already disappeared in a mist so dense that that Mopple felt almost tempted to take a bite of it. He controlled himself and pulled up grass instead. The mist wasn't a problem to Mopple. He didn't seem as well in the mist. That was true, but when Mopple saw poorly anyways. He was more bothered by the fact that he couldn't pick up a scent properly if he had cool, grassy water drops inside his nostrils. But in general, he felt safe in the mist, as if he were walking through the fleece of a ginormous sheep, fleece as light as a feather. Now he was sure that at least his first reason for getting out had to be a good one. Mopple loved misty grass, clear tasting as water, with all disturbing smells washed off. He could look for Miss Maple later, and perhaps she'd be attracted over here by his grass munching sound anyways. He wandered back and forth at a trotting pace until he didn't feel quite so hungry. So we're going to stop there, and then part 2 of chapter 4 will continue tomorrow.